Job was tempted to give up faith. Job was tempted to curse God. So the devil was given permission by God to tempt Job into destroying his relationship with God, because the only person who can destroy a relationship with God is you. Welcome to the Father Leo Show, where I am dishing out faith, culture, and commentary. And in this episode, we are going to talk about sin. People don't think that the Catholic Church talks about it enough, because I think we talk about it perhaps not in the best way possible. And you can't do everything in a 10-minute homily. So shows like this will help you to get a full understanding between the difference of, say, temptation and sin, and what does the Catholic Church actually teach about the two. Let's just jump right into it. But before we do, please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. Make sure that you let us know your thoughts. There are a lot of people who watch the show but aren't actually subscribed. Clicking on it helps us to overcome the algorithms that suppress good Catholic, pastoral, practical content. And as always, we can only practically do shows like this if we have your support. Go to patreon.com/thefatherleo show at any level and know that you'll get access to some great content and also some special perks. So let's just jump right into it now with a little teaching on why temptation could be a sign of holiness. Check this out. We clearly know that temptation is kind of like neutral. It's obviously neutral, because it's going to come to you regardless. Jesus himself was tempted. And so if Christ himself was tempted, then we, in our own humanity, which just basically means humble, we are going to be tempted ourselves. But temptation is very different from sin. Temptation has to be understood as connected to our conscience, because our conscience can tell us whether we're putting ourselves in harm's way or in temptation's way, or if we're running into it like a wall in front of us, and we run right into it and we don't even realize that we're hurting ourselves because we're falling to the temptation itself. And so let me just share with you what the Catechism tries to teach us in 2290. It requires us to understand the virtue of temperance, because temperance can help us to avoid temptations. So the virtue of temperance disposes us to avoid every kind of excess, the abuse of food, alcohol, tobacco, or medicine, even, I would say, sexual or personal gratification. Now, I'm not adding to the Catechism. I mean, it's a very complete document in and of itself, but in reality, we know that this is a man-made document, and so there's always ways that we can improve upon it. And so the temperance is obviously rooted in things that we do to ourselves. Again, food, alcohol, tobacco, or medicine, because that's where people find, when I talk to people on a spiritual direction or spiritual counseling level, they will confess the sins of giving in to the temptation of excessive or abusive use of food, drink, drugs, or even, say, a personal or a sexual relationship with somebody. And please know, I'm not trying to make anyone feel uncomfortable. We're just talking about things that we should talk about in the spiritual world. And that is, there is a difference between the temptation and sin. The sin is the act of falling into temptation. But we know that people who are very holy experience great temptations as well. Jesus is the primary figure in all of that. I know that the early apostles faced temptations. St. Paul will say, I do the things that I know I shouldn't do, and I don't do the things that I want to do, namely the good things. So if St. Paul, who was a doctor of the church to the Gentiles, a preacher of the good news, one of the princes of the church, he's a foundation for our Catholic faith. He himself experienced temptation. Who else? St. Peter experienced great temptation as well, to the point where he will deny Jesus 3 times. In fact, the tradition is that he was tempted to leave Rome because he was hearing how Christians were being persecuted in Rome. He was tempted to leave. But then he saw Jesus going back, an image of Jesus going back to the city of Rome, and he asked the question, now a famous movie, Domine quo vadis, Lord, where are you going? And while Peter was tempted to flee the cross and the persecution, Jesus was encouraging him, pick up your cross and follow me. So our temptations are very much there. Sadly, if people have fallen so deeply into the life of sin, and it's become, say, a habit, their moral culpability is actually diminished because you're addicted. So, for example, if someone is just doing drugs occasionally, that is a grave sin because you're harming your body. But if you're addicted to drugs, you're physically, emotionally, psychologically dependent on drugs in order to survive, and you say, fall into drug use again, the culpability is diminished. Why? Because you are less free, because we would become slaves to sin. That's why, in Romans chapter 6, you'll hear St. Paul say, for sin shall no longer be your master, because you are not under the law, but under grace. We're almost invited to live a life of freedom from sin. But here's the clincher. You are never going to be free from temptation. That's depressing because nobody likes it. You are never going to be free from temptation. Why? Because you're human and the devil is real. And the devil wants nothing more than for you to fall to temptation. But even worse, not get up and try again. You see, the devil has a great tool called discouragement and wants nothing more than for you to be so discouraged because you are so tempted. And let's just admit that the temptation that people struggle with the most are sins of the flesh or a desire for sensuality and intimacy. And the devil will distort those very human basic needs and turn it into something selfish and something sinful. And yes, people fall to those temptations either by themselves or with others. And it's a sad thing because then we feel kind of dirty, we feel gross. But the temptation is to be afraid of your vulnerable self. And so I'm just going to tell you what I sometimes tell people who confess issues or temptations, or they fall into, say, like the sins of the flesh. And that is, number one, be not afraid of that sin. The fact that they're coming to me for confession tells me their conscience knows what's right and wrong, and that they understand that they may have fallen to a temptation because those temptations come out of sometimes nowhere, out of left field. Like you can be in church and you can even get those temptations. You could be in prayer in front of the Blessed Sacrament, praying the rosary, and you can still get those temptations. Where are they coming from? Well, to a degree, from the evil one. Just let's admit that the devil wants nothing more than for you to be distracted from prayer or from living a good life because of that temptation. But it can also be a result of human issues, like your own human need for longing and compassion. But it can also be an indicator that something isn't right in your life, that there's something that's unsettled. And therefore, I always encourage people to ask themselves, in the privacy of their own home, to kind of take a hold of that sin and kind of look at it from all angles and learn from it. Because remember, temptation is ultimately neutral. And the more we can understand the temptation and the sources of it, and when it comes the hardest and the strongest, then we can actually have a game plan. There was this experience in spiritual direction where, when being taught how to be spiritual directors, you can say to someone, take a cold shower, go for a walk, distract yourself positively. That way you avoid the sin. But that doesn't mean that you've understood the temptation, because we got to understand that the temptation, if it is permitted, it's because God has allowed it. God is so powerful that God is the one who allows people to go through what they went through, including Jesus. going through the cross and even being tempted by the devil in the desert for 40 days, that is. God allowed that to happen to test the faith. And so sometimes you can see temptation as kind of going to a spiritual gym and doing the workout, and you'll grow stronger. And so the spiritual directors were sometimes told to encourage people, if, say, someone is going through a temptation, get up, go for a walk, take a cold shower, distract yourself positively. And that's good advice, certainly good advice. That way you don't fall to the temptation. But at some point, say like when you're getting ready to go to bed, or if you have time to pray, ask the Lord to give you the grace to understand what that temptation is trying to tell you. That's going to encourage spiritual maturity, spiritual growth. Because what we have to do is learn, when are we most tempted? When are we most vulnerable? So that we avoid the near occasions of sin, but also know how to deal with it when the temptations come. So I'm going to offer just this little thought to you. Couple them, first of all. Don't ever be discouraged about temptation. It's not a sin. It is neutral. And if you fall, if you succumb to a temptation because it's kind of weighing on your mind all the time, it's only because you allow yourself to think about that temptation. Temptation comes, say a Hail Mary, and then just move on with the day, and you'll see how that temptation doesn't last forever. It doesn't mean that the temptation will never come back again. No, sometimes it comes back with a vengeance. And that's why Christ will encourage us to grow spiritually by being devoted to daily prayer, regular ongoing prayer, and to discipline our bodies, which is why temperance, that's why I wanted to read that Catechism quote, that virtue of temperance is so key to overcoming temptations. But should you fall, this is a quote that I think came from Oscar Wilde. Yeah. Not even Christian, but he says, every saint has a past. Every sinner has a future. We all have to recognize that in our humanity, we are going to fall. Christ fell 3 times. That's not an insignificant number. But his faith helped him to get up and to keep moving. That's our job. That's our vocation in life, is to keep moving forward. And then also to know that sometimes God allows the temptations to come to us because we are close to him. And the number one character in all of the scriptures besides Jesus is Job. Job was tempted to give up faith. Job was tempted to curse God. Job was tempted with not only emotional damage of knowing his family is being killed, but also physical damage, like he was physically in pain all the time. So the devil was given permission by God to tempt Job into destroying his relationship with God, because the only person who can destroy a relationship with God is you. And guess what? Temptations and even sin cannot destroy your relationship with God if you have at least the faith to get up and try again. You see, the temptation after you sin is to not go to confession. It's just the reality. Again, let me repeat that. The temptation after you sin is to be so discouraged that you're filled with despair and you don't go to confession. So, don't be afraid of temptations. My spiritual director even told me this, and it might have come from a quote from the Venerable Fulton Sheen. Not sure of the source, but it's definitely worth sharing with you. He said, before we sin, the devil excuses and Jesus accuses. After we sin, the devil accuses, Jesus excuses. It doesn't say that Jesus is like, I'm good with the fact that you sin. No, it said Jesus knows we're human. We are prone to fall. And that's why we need a Savior. And it ain't me. It ain't you. It's Jesus himself. I hope that this kind of spiritual conversation helps you to know the difference between temptation and sin and what does the church teach about it. Please keep up the good fight. Sometimes I'm tempted because, we get so many haters on this. I can't tell you how many times people will just say really negative things in the comments for whatever reason. And sometimes we root some of those comments out. Sometimes we don't have the time to do it. But it can be discouraging, and I can be tempted to kind of just keep my voice silent and just, I don't even know, do nothing. But that would be a great temptation, because we're supposed to preach the good news in season and out of season, whether it's popular or unpopular. And so a show like this hopefully can help you in the things that you are being tempted to do that's wrong, and tempted not to do if it is good. And if that's the case, you're in very good company. Saint Paul experienced the exact same thing. Thank you for watching. I hope this episode helps you in your own spiritual life. Please make sure you like, subscribe, share, and comment. Let me know what your thoughts are about sin and temptation. How do you deal with them without obviously going into anything specific? It's not a confession. But how do you deal with those temptations, and how do you help others to do the same? And also, please make sure you go to patreon.com/thefatherleo show. Support us at any level, and know that you are not only helping us and my team to make shows and content for your consumption, but it also goes to support our mission so that we can continue to dish out faith, culture, and commentary. God bless you, and stay hungry for God.